Greetings, my scattered sisters and brothers in the Lord. Trust you know the Lord is with you wherever you find yourself scattered today, and that you know that his presence with you is more than enough for whatever you might face today. We are going to begin a study on Paul's letter to the church at Philippi. But before we actually look at the letter, we're going to spend a little bit of time in Acts chapter 16, where we get the account of Paul starting the church at Philippi. Very interesting. Paul normally goes to synagogues to start his churches. Being Jewish, he knows that when he goes to a new town, the Jewish synagogue will welcome him and give him a platform for teaching and preaching, and eventually out of that, a church gets started. Well, when Paul goes to Philippi, there's no synagogue there. Philippi is a Roman colony, and so it's filled with retired Roman military officers. It's very heavy on Roman culture and a lot of pride in being citizens of Rome. It's located in northern Greece, but it is very Roman. It's kind of like Little Italy in San Diego. A lot of pride in Italian culture, a lot of people with Italian heritage, Italian roots. And so it's Little Italy, even though it's in Southern California. Well, Philippi would kind of be Little Italy, even though it was in northern Greece. Only they wouldn't think themselves little at all. A lot of pride in their Roman citizenship. So Paul goes to Philippi, and you might be wondering, well, how did he end up at Philippi where there's no Jewish synagogue? Well, the Lord was leading him. We discover earlier in chapter 16 that Paul felt compelled by God through a vision of a man in Macedonia kind of waving him to come that direction with the gospel. And so Paul takes Silas and Timothy and another man who we think is Luke. This is the first place where we get the we passages in Acts. And so it looks like we have Paul, Silas, Timothy, and Luke making their way to Philippi. In fact, some think that the man that Paul has a vision of in terms of inviting him to Macedonia, northern Greece, and on to Philippi is Luke himself. Now, we don't know this, but it could very well be that God was using Luke to move Paul to northern Greece and to Philippi. So that's how he gets there, kind of trying to follow the leadership of the Lord. And maybe Luke had something to do with that. Just don't know. Well, there's no synagogue there. So Paul goes outside the city to the riverside where he's heard that there is a prayer meeting. Turns out it's a women's prayer meeting. And some of the women were probably Jewish, but not all of them were. And they're out there praying, and Paul shows up, and they're willing to listen to him. And so he starts talking to them, starts teaching them about Jesus. One of the ladies there, her name was Lydia. And Lydia was from Thyatira, which is an area in modern day Turkey. She's a dealer of purple, and she worships God, Israel's God. And Paul tells her about Jesus. And we read in verse 14 of chapter 16 that the Lord opened her heart to respond to receive everything that Paul was teaching, speaking about Jesus. She becomes a believer. She becomes the first convert there, and she's baptized, and her household is baptized. And then she opens her house to Paul and his companions, invites them to stay there, and that becomes their base of ministry there in Philippi. The first house church in Philippi was the church that met at Lydia's house. Pretty impressive. Now, here's what I want us to think about with all of this. The Lord was at work moving Paul there. The Lord was at work before Paul got there in terms of the women meeting and praying outside the city. And the Lord is the one who opened Lydia's heart to receive the gospel. The Lord was the one who opened Lydia or moved Lydia to open her home to Paul and his companions so that there was the first house church there. And then what we discover is even after Paul is gone, the Lord continues to work there in those people, and they become one of the most supportive congregations of Paul. So what should we dwell on with all of this? Well, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is just the Lord's working. It was beyond Paul's expectation. It was in ways that Paul would not have expected, but there's no question the Lord was working. And especially in terms of opening Lydia's heart to receive Paul's teaching about Jesus. So wherever you're scattered today, know that there's a pretty good chance that the Lord is at work in where you're at before you got there, and that the Lord is encouraging you to share your testimony, to talk about Jesus, because the Lord is just waiting to open somebody's heart, a Lydia's heart, to receive your testimony, to receive Jesus. And in that, the Lord is going to start a church, or at least a place of ministry, a place of telling others about Jesus. So, wherever you're scattered today, know that the Lord was there before you, and that the Lord is moving and just waiting to open somebody's heart. You just need to trust him enough to speak the word. God bless, and have a great day.